Hello, everyone. I'm back. I'm Minister James Moss, and this is Continuing Education. We're in the book of Luke, chapter 15, and this one's going to wrap up chapter 15. This one is entitled, Jesus Tells the Parable of the Lost Son. So we're going to pick up where we left off. We're going to pick up at verse 11 and go through the end of the chapter, which is verse 32. All right, so this one may be a little bit longer than the other ones. And when I come across certain videos like that, I tell people, look, if you have to, pause it or remember where you left off. If you need to come back, take it in chunks or bits and pieces, but I teach all of these in its entirety. I don't break up any of the topics. So that way, if you wanted to, you could go right through it at one time or at your leisure. But one of the things is, do not rush through these. Okay, these videos will be there for you as long as it's the will of the Father to keep them there, and you can move at your leisure and at your understanding, which is what I actually presume that you do, or assume that you are doing. But I prefer that you go at your own understanding. Once you get it, grasp it, then go. All right. So we're going into this, and we're just going to start. The previous two parables, the one of lost sheep and the lost coin, build up to the climax, the parable of the lost son, a parable that is unique to Luke. Through the parable of the lost son, Jesus presents a vivid illustration of God and his mercy for repentant sinners. All right. So a lot of us, we call this one the prodigal son. Okay. If you're not familiar with that, it looked like it was something hanging from my hat, man. I don't know. Okay. All right. So here we go. And he said, a certain man had two sons, and the younger of them said to his father, Father, give me the portion of goods that falleth to me. And he divided unto them his living. And not many days after, the younger son gathered all together and took his journey into a far country, and there wasted his substance with riotous living. And when he had spent all, there arose a mighty famine in the land, and he began to be in want. And he went and joined himself to a citizen of that country, and he sent him into his fields to feed swine. And he would fain have filled his belly with the husk that the swine did eat, and no man gave unto him. And when he came to himself, he said, How many hired servants of my father's house have bread enough and to spare, and I perish with hunger? I will arise and go into my father's house, go to my father, and will say unto him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before thee. I am no more worthy to be called thy son. Make me as one of thy hired servants. And he arose and came to his father. But when he was yet a great way off, his father saw him and had compassion, and ran and fell on his neck and kissed him. And the son said unto him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and in thy sight, and am no more worthy to be called thy son. But the father said to his servants, Bring forth the best robe and put it on him, and put a ring on his hand and shoes on his feet. And bring hither the fatted calf and kill it, and let us eat and be merry. For this my son was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. And they began to be merry. Now his older son was in the field, and as he came and drew nigh to the house, he heard music and dancing. And he called one of the servants and asked what these things meant. And he said unto him, Thy brother is come, and thy father hath killed the fatted calf, because he hath received him safe and sound. And he was angry and would not go in. Therefore came his father out and entreated him. And he, answering, said to his father, Lo, these many years do I serve thee, neither transgressed I at any time thy commandment, and yet thou never gavest me a kid, that I might make merry with my friends. But as soon as thy son was come, which hath devoured thy living with harlots, thou hast killed for him the fatted calf. And he said unto him, Son, thou art ever with me, and all that I have is thine. It was meet that we should make merry and be glad. For this thy brother was dead and is alive again, and was lost and is found. All right. A lot of interplay there. So we're going to see what the commentaries have to say. I'm not going to really jump into giving my own just yet. I might jump in here and there. Who knows? Verses 11 and 12. Jesus continued with another parable to illustrate the point further that God rejoices when lost sinners repent and find forgiveness. A man had two sons, the younger of whom wanted his share of his father's estate, or his inheritance, basically. This would have been 1/3 of the total estate, with the oldest son receiving 2/3, a double portion of the other as prescribed by law. In most cases, the son would have received this at his father's death. Although fathers sometimes choose to divide up their inheritance early and retire from managing their estates, this was probably the case. What is unusual is that the younger son initiated the division of the estate. This showed arrogant disrespect for his father's authority as head of the family. I don't know if I completely agree with that. What it was, if you're really familiar with growing up, you feel like at some point you want to get out and do things, be your own person. I don't know if it was really arrogant disrespect toward the father as being head of the family, because he came to the father and just asked for his portion of the inheritance. He was like, I want to get on with my life. I don't want to wait till you die. So again, I don't know. I'm not saying that they're wrong, but I personally don't think that this is the case with the son having an arrogant disrespect for the father's position. Okay, but that's just me speaking. All right, here we go. Verses 13-14. Within just a few days, the younger son was on his way, indicating that this had been his plan when he had asked his father for his inheritance in the first place. Of course, he wanted to leave. He packed all his belongings and traveled to a distant land. The young man apparently had wanted to live his own way, be his own master, get out from under the rules of his home and his father. Money was his ticket out, so he took it and ran. Understandable. That doesn't mean that he was disrespectful. It was like he was more respectful, saying, I respect you in your household. I'm not going to disrespect you in your household with the type of lifestyle I want or see for myself right now. So I'm going to ask you for my part of the inheritance. Again, they assume too much. Okay. In this distant land, he wasted all his money on wild living, but then his money ran out. To make matters worse, a great famine swept over the land, and the boy did not even have money for food. Verses 15-16. The young man became so desperate that he began to work feeding pigs. According to Moses' law, pigs were unclean animals. To protect themselves from defilement, Jews would not even touch pigs. For a Jew to stoop to feeding pigs would have been a great humiliation. The pods were the seeds of the carob tree which grows around the Mediterranean Sea. That no one gave him anything shows that he was neglected and insignificant. He had truly sunk to the depths. He had hit rock bottom. Okay. Verses 17-19. Sitting among pigs that were better fed than he was, he reflected on his life back home. With no money, no dignity, and so, he thought, no claim to sonship in his father's household. He decided to go home to his father, confess his sin, and ask to be taken on as a hired man. This is still not a show of arrogance for the leadership of his father. All right. I don't know why I'm hung up on that, but it just, he just thought that he wanted to do things on his own way. And he respected his father's house enough to say, hey, look, rather than be disrespectful in your household, can I have my part of the inheritance when I can go and do my own thing? All right. At least he would not go hungry. The key lies in the words that he planned to say to his father, I have sinned against both heaven and you. He wanted to tell his father that he was sorry. He wanted to repent of the selfishness that had led him to leave and spend all the money that his father had set aside for his future. Even if it meant living as a hired man in his own home, he would return there in order to say these things to his father. Verses 20-21. So the son returned home to his father, not knowing what to expect. The best he could anticipate was a cold shoulder, a half-hearted welcome, or a chance to be hired as a slave. The father, however, seemed to have cast his eyes on the horizon many times since the son had left, hoping one day to see him returning. And to me, that was the Spirit of the Lord letting him know he's going to come back even God showing him this direction. Keep looking over here. He's going to come back one day. Finally, his father saw him coming, even while he was far away. The father ran, embraced, and kissed his son. He was filled with love and compassion at the sight of his son who had come home. The son began to give his father the speech he had prepared, but he didn't even get to the part about asking to be hired, for the father wanted to welcome his son back into his home with a grand celebration. In the two preceding stories, the seeker actively looked for the sheep and the coin, which could not return by themselves. In this story, the father watched and waited. He was dealing with a human being with a will, but he was ready to greet his son if he returned. In the same way, God's love is constant and patient and welcoming. He will search and give people the opportunities to respond, but he will not force them to come to him. Like the father in this story, God waits patiently for people to come to their senses. Verses 22 through 24. The father immediately restored this destitute and humbled young man as his son. Then the calf that was being fattened up for the time when a special feast should be prepared was killed. The father could think of no more fitting celebration. His son had been as good as dead to him, but now had returned to life. He had been lost, but now he was found. As the shepherd celebrated upon finding the lost sheep and the woman upon finding her lost coin, so this father celebrated at finding his lost son. Verses 25 through 27. The older son, according to tradition, would have received a double inheritance. He probably had continued to be under his father's authority, working on the estate, and while he would inherit it, this would not take place until his father's death. So he was in the fields working, being responsible to do the work that he should do, patiently following the typical plan for passing on the family inheritance. Imagine this other brother's surprise at returning from a day of hard work to the sound of a grand celebration going on in the house. Naturally, he wondered what was going on. The servant simply replied with the facts. The wayward brother had returned, the calf had been killed, the feast had been prepared, and everyone was celebrating the brother's safe return. Verses 28 through 30. At the report of the news, the older brother was angry and wouldn't go in to join the celebration. The older son was quite reasonable in his list of complaints. The father could have consented, pacifying his older son with additional gifts and rewards. But relationships prosper on love, not on fairness. Love is the dynamic that sweeps reasonable claims into secondary concerns here. When relationships need love, we often must let fairness take a second seat. While the resentment of the older brother is easy to understand, his volley of words reveals the same sort of self-righteousness that afflicted the religious leaders of Jesus' day. The key to understanding this story is found in the context of verses 1 and 2. The younger son stands for the tax collectors and sinners. The waiting father is God, and the older brother represents the religious leaders. The younger son had lived as a notorious sinner, so the brother wanted nothing to do with him. Yet the loving father, who had gone out to meet his younger son, also came out to plead with his elder one, who would not take a moment to understand that he would inherit everything that he was working for, and that he was clearly loved by his father. He only felt angry that his father was celebrating for an irresponsible person. The religious leaders, claiming how hard they slaved for God, were attempting to keep myriad rules and regulations, many of which God never ever even demanded. They had the Father's love, but had chosen to reject it in favor of hard work and self-denial. So when God eagerly welcomed the sinful common people into the kingdom, the religious leaders were refusing to join the celebration. But God rejoiced that these sinful people had come home, and he invited even these religious leaders to join the party. They had only anger and resentment, and that their efforts had not earned a party. Verses 31 and 32. The father spoke kindly to his overheated son. The son had not been displaced as the firstborn. He had his relationship with the father, and he still had his inheritance. The younger son had squandered his and had gone through great suffering before coming to his senses. The wild life the younger son had brought with him, or had brought him only to ruin, and he returned home with no inheritance, humbled from having suffered some hard knocks. The older son needed to get his perspective. He had to be able to see and learn how to be grateful that he had not that he didn't have to go through this type of suffering that the younger son did, and that he could appreciate. He didn't go through that pain and everything else that the younger son did, and to be able to celebrate this happy day with his younger brother and his father. All right, despite sinners, notorious outcasts, difficult people, all have been offered salvation. God's people must not stand aside and above, but must join in heaven's celebration when those who were lost have been found. All right. And so what we have with the prodigal son or the lost son is that, okay, Jesus, when he told this parable, as is laid out in the commentary, it was, of course, it was representative of something greater. But what it was representing is that the Jews felt like, because of entitlement, that nobody else was supposed to receive any benefits from this at all, because we're the ones that kept the laws, and we're the ones that were chosen from the beginning, and we this and we that and we whatever, and to the point that they felt like they didn't have to. They chose turning down God's way over self-piety, self-righteousness. I'm going to inflict pain on myself to show that I'm worthy of the kingdom of heaven. Anyway, you get it, right? You get what's being said. And so when the son that left, and see, even not only just in a Gentile way of speaking of tax collectors and stuff like that, but also think about backsliders, people who knew God and then turned their backs on God and went about their way and found that there was nothing out there for them but suffering and pain, and they come back. There's a lot of people that, well, I ain't backslide. I didn't go out there and start doing the old things I used to do and do this and do that or whatever. Why is God showing them so much favor over me? The same principle. All right, that we got to quit trying to judge people and say, oh, well, we need to, whatever's right is fair. Whatever's fair is right. That's not always the case. And as we found out, that love outrules what we think is fair. All right. So until next time, God bless you. God keep you. And remember, keep studying.